Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RedGamingTech.com video, we're going to be discussing as well as analysing tech news, which as usual, has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. It's New Year's Eve, believe it or not. Hard to believe that this year has gone so quickly. Seems to have absolutely flown by. But I hope you've all had an amazing day and are prepping for an excellent new year. Given it is New Year's Eve, and I'm recording a little bit later than I anticipated, there may be some fireworks that occasionally go off in the background. Unfortunately, there's not much I can do about it. I will, of course, do my best to remove any background noise during video editing. But there are so many pieces of news that I really want to discuss with you that have actually popped up, despite the fact that it is New Year, basically. One of the things I would like to go through first, however, concerns TSMC and their production. So, as we all know, the Ryzen 3000 series has been somewhat popular, but particularly the higher core count SKUs have been very difficult to procure. The 3950X in some countries particularly has been gold dust, which has led to, unfortunately, some scalping going on, particularly on websites like eBay. Anywho, so what's been the cause? Is it just that TSMC were not able to produce enough silicon for AMD? Well, allegedly, no, that's not the case. And this information comes to us via AnandTech, specifically an interview with the CTO of AMD, Mark Papermaster. He confirmed that the supply of TSMC wasn't actually the issue, instead it was AMD. What they basically did is they did not order enough chips to be produced. Basically, they underestimated the demand for the Zen 2 silicon, although they are assuring us that this is going to be resolved in the future and that they are currently ordering more manufacturing capability from TSMC. Continuing on the AMD processor theme, there's also some other interesting comments from the very same interview. Once again, it will be linked in the description of the video. Mark Papermaster goes on to say that they are still looking to beat the annual 7% IPC growth with future Zen cores. Furthermore, they want to continue to push out new Zen cores between every 12 and 18 months, which is quite a lofty goal, as I'm sure you'll agree. As you are likely aware, Zen 3 is going to launch next year. It's looking like it's going to be late 2020, probably Q3, maybe Q4 2020, particularly for the Ryzen 4000 series. But Mark Papermaster assures us that we're on a 12 to 18 month cadence, and we believe that's sustainable. It's what the industry demands from us, end quote. What's interestingly though is that Mark also states that AMD are not looking to perform kind of a tick-tock canvas, which is actually different from my recollection to what Forrest Norrod said. He said that they were looking to do tick-tock. In regards to the IPC that I mentioned at the start though, he said, and I quote, "We've stated before the industry has had a slow 7% annual growth rate in single-threaded performance, and our goal is to beat that with every generation of our products. We've executed better than the industry of our recent products, and we exceeded the industry expectations," end quote. Now, if we do look at the uplift, IPC uplift, that you can see of the industry standard versus Zen 3, it does look rather significant what the targets are for Zen 3. Unfortunately, obviously, they're not numbers. And furthermore, we can't really tell much because if you look at that line, Zen to Zen Plus would not be very far along at all. It was around a 3% gain-ish in IPC, primarily due to enhancements on the cache. Oh, and one last thing regarding the IPC uplift. I will also point out that one of my sources has actually given me a lot more insight into IPC gains for Zen 3. However, I'm not going to go into it in this video simply because, to be honest with you, my brain's kind of fogged up, as you might be able to tell with a couple of my stumbles in this video. It's kind of late, and I've been visiting friends with stuff with New Year's, so I will be going into this more in depth over the next couple of days. And that's also one of the reasons I'm not on camera today, because quite frankly I look like a zombie. But with that said, there is another piece of AMD news. Jeez, I might as well just call this the AMD day. So This one concerns Navi 21 and alleged specifications of the high-end next-generation RDNA GPUs. This is thanks to a Chinese message board. The alleged specifications is that it's using TSMC's 7nm+. Quite frankly, I think that's probably right, given what AMD themselves have stated and we've seen on their roadmaps. The die is absolutely massive. It's about twice the size of the 5700 XT. It weighs in at 505mm squared, which is quite monstrous. Now, some people will point out that cards in, let's say, the RTX 20 series are larger in terms of their die. And you're 100% right. The RTX 2080, for example, is quite comparable in sizes. About 10% larger. It's 545mm squared. But that is using the 12nm process, compared to this, which is using the 7nm plus process. Basically, the performance is said to be about twice the speed of the Navi 10 GPU. We can presume that's not the 5700 non-XT, but it's going to be the 5700 XT, which would mean that this GPU would be pretty darn fast. It's also, unsurprisingly, using GDDR6 memory, and we can make the presumption that it's also going to be a wider memory bus as well. Now, one of the ways it's allegedly doing this is by featuring more compute units. I'm hearing it's going to have up to 80 compute units on board for this GPU, which would, well, mean it's the largest GPU that AMD have produced in terms of the number of compute units. As we know, with GCN there was kind of a limit with 64 compute units, whereas this is going up to 80, which means that it's going to be monstrous in terms of raw performance. I'm going to say it's probably going to be a bit faster than the RTX 2080 Ti, although it's very difficult to know what these performance figures, well, I say figures in a very loose term, that are being leaked online actually represent. Is it the T-flop performance that they're referring to? Is it actual frames per second which are being created? Is it specific titles which it does really, really well on? And so on and so on. I also heard from one of my sources, this is a video I put out maybe a weekish ago, that the RDNA 2 architecture is more efficient than the first generation, but unfortunately I wasn't given specifics. You might also recall that one of my sources told me that Navi 23 is what AMD are referring to as, quote, the Nvidia killer, end quote, and allegedly a lot of this is born out of frustration by AMD's upper management. I was told Lisa Su in particular has been quite frustrated with Nvidia always having the advantage over AMD when it comes to the GPUs. There are also some whispers that the RTX 30 series of cards, which of course would be most likely at least referred to as Ampere, is also facing a delay. One of the theories I've heard of this is concerning Samsung. You probably heard by now that Samsung's 7nm process isn't doing so well. Both the yields as well as clock frequencies are said to be not hitting the targets that Nvidia and their partners had hoped for. This is one of the reasons that Nvidia themselves went public and said that no, we're going to be using TSMC for the bulk of the production of our GPUs, although we will have some products which are going to be produced on Samsung, although they did not actually specify what the breakdown was, in other words, what GPUs would be produced with which manufacturer. We can also presume that Navi 21/23 are going to feature hardware ray tracing on board, although it's going to most likely be implemented in a very different way to how Nvidia are implementing it with the Turing architecture. So it's going to be fascinating to see what AMD choose to price these GPUs at. A common gripe I've had recently with graphics cards, of course, is the pricing. Amy recently covered a piece of news that the price of GDDR6 memory is also increasing as well. This is down to a variety of factors, not least of which that GDDR6 memory is simply more in demand right now. Obviously, for example, if we look at the Turing range of cards, basically every single Turing GPU is outfitted with GDDR6. Then you've got the RX 5000 series, once again, all outfitted with GDDR6. And now we know, of course, that the second generation of RDNA is also going to be using it. Plus, you can't forget the next generation consoles. Oh, and one very final piece of news. Well, it's not a piece of news actually, it's just something I forgot to mention in regards to the PlayStation 5 yesterday. So one of the piece of news that's been floating around recently is that the PlayStation 5 features 36 compute units. Now, as I mentioned, I have seen the internal documentation myself, which seems to indicate that this is true. I've seen that it does have 40 compute units on board, but 4 of which will be disabled for the PlayStation 5's retail console, although yesterday I also mentioned that there is some rumours going around with a couple of my sources that allegedly anyway Sony are considering holding back the PlayStation 5 or doing some redevelopment on the GPU to obviously increase the performance level. However, one thing I actually forgot to mention, because I'm an idiot, is there is actually a really simple way for Sony to increase the performance of the console, and that concerns disabling fewer compute units on the GPU for yield reasons. So real quick, when a GPU or a piece of silicon is created, not all silicon is perfect. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, on a wafer you may get, let's say, 80% or 90% of the chips which hit the targets. However, some of the ones which are produced simply won't. Maybe some of the cores are disabled, it won't run at the appropriate clock speeds or whatever. We saw this same thing with the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox. Basically, both Sony and Microsoft had 2 additional compute units which were disabled during the manufacturing process. So the Xbox One had 14 compute units with 12 active, and the PlayStation 4 had 18 compute units active, but there were 20 actually present on the APU. So the rumour has it that there's going to be 4 disabled for the PlayStation 5, but in theory anyway, Sony could simply disable only 2 of them for yield purposes, which would mean it would have less margin for error for the console's manufacturing, but it would also mean that they would have higher performance by having, let's say, 2 additional compute units active. It looks like the clock frequency of the PS5 is around 2000 MHz for the GPU, so if there were an additional 2 compute units active, that would give them around half a T-flop of additional performance. The maths for that, by the way, are 2, because that's the number of compute units, times 64, which is the number of ALU per compute unit, and then you times that by the clock frequency, which is 2000, and then you times that by 2 once again, because that's operations per clock. Anyway, I think that just about does it for this particular video. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and thank you very much for spending some of your New Year's Eve with me, or New Year's Day, whenever you're watching this, depending upon your time zone. I thank you very much for supporting the channel, and if you have enjoyed the video, definitely consider subscribing. There will be a lot more content coming up over the next several days, but I'm going to let you all go, so take care of yourselves. Bye for now.